if anybody else has heard that. So it must be some truth to that. But I think initially, when you calm down and when you realize that you are as close as probably any team is in the NBA, period, I think he would come to his senses and start to realize that I'm the closest team. I'm on the closest team. So I think all that going to LA, I think that's going to calm down. I think the immediate frustration, of course, is that we lost and what do we do now? So that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, like I said, I wouldn't rule out LA because like you said, he hasn't shot the rumor down. That's one thing. And supposedly his wife really enjoys LA. That's somewhere she wants to go. So keep that in mind too. You know, people do things for their wives, right?
Right.
Wife says
happy
she needs to go, you know, happy wife, you know.
Exactly.
She says, hey, I want to go to LA, then you start making plans to go to LA. But I mean, I think that also depends on who's in LA as well. And you have to wait to see how all that's going to shape out. If that shapes out well, then it is a possibility. But to me, I just don't see that as being a legitimate place for him because of everything that is going on, because of the opportunities that he has in the Eastern Conference, and just his, you know, but again, he always has the option to get to the finals. Like, that's there every day, all day.
Yeah.
So,
all right, want to give a big shout out, big welcome to Rauf, your Rudy in the building. Also Vince Wright, sports governor of Minnesota. And he says, go Timberwolves, welcome Mr. Butler. Definitely, we got to get into this conversation. So Butler, that was the biggest trade of all of them that went down over this past week. Obviously, Jimmy Butler going to the Timberwolves for Zach LaVine and Chris Dunn. Man, I didn't see this coming. I thought maybe Jimmy Butler was going to somehow, some way get traded to the Cavs. Didn't end up happening. He goes to the Timberwolves. He's going to be reunited with his previous coach, Thibodeau. So, what's your thoughts on this deal?
I thought it was great. You know, this is something that's been discussed for a couple of years now, since last year, actually. You remember last year in the draft where Chicago was asking for Chris Dunn and Minnesota refused to give him up. So the trade never happened. Well, now we've seen it a year later happen. And it's probably because when you look at the Timberwolves are just missing something. You know, and you can't really figure out what it is, but they're missing something. And so this is a way of them trying to possibly play with, you know, the team, trying to see what they can put together. Chris Dunn was on the bench. And I had said this from the gate. I didn't think, even when they drafted Chris Dunn, that Chris Dunn was going to be the starter and he was not going to overtake Ricky Rubio. Ricky Rubio is an underrated player. He's not a great player, don't get me wrong. But he is a playmaker. He is a legit point guard. He plays defense. He sees the floor probably as good as anybody else in the league. You know, and that's something that you can't teach. That's something that you can't find easily. So I knew that it was that a possibility of him just, you know, as Chris Dunn coming in and taking his spot, that wasn't going to happen. So now that you see this happening, you see that basically they bought into possibly keeping Ricky Rubio for a while and seeing what Ricky Rubio could do and putting a bunch of playmakers around him or scorers around him. You know, Wiggins is a legit threat. Of course, you know, Butler can score, and Towns. I mean, Towns is probably one of the best bigs in the league.
Yeah. So
you're putting these weapons around this traditional point guard. You allow him to kind of space the floor and spread the ball around, sort of like Jason Kidd back in the day. We'll see what happens. I don't know if they close the gap on anybody in the Western Conference. Like that's a huge pickup for them. Hopefully they make the playoffs finally. And I think that's your first goal is to make the playoffs. Again, the West is extremely competitive. So they get in the playoffs first. That'd be the first step, and then you go from there.
Yeah, definitely. That is the immediate first step always, is to at least get in the running, at least get in the playoff, getting an attorney, and then from there, depends on what you have. Vince Wright says, Minnesota is very happy. Fans are digging it. He is the sports governor of Minnesota. So obviously I would take that comment very highly coming from you. So appreciate that. And everybody that's tuned in, if you want to join in on the chat line, you can do that on Spreaker.com or on the Spreaker app. Click on the comment bubble. Click on the comment box. Probably log in on your Facebook or Twitter or your email, and you can join in with what we're talking about. So, so that's a Jimmy Butler trade that went down. To me, that was interesting. Let's talk about this D'Angelo Russell. This was going to happen sooner or later. And the minute the issue with him taking pictures of Swaggy P or whatever, that issue that happened, I knew a trade was going to come. You can't have a guy in the locker room like this that nobody obviously liked except probably Magic. And Magic had to have a say-so in this trade. But he ends up going to the Brooklyn Nets, which is kind of like hell for basketball.
The abyss.
Right. The basketball NBA abyss. So, wow. Sorry to hear that, D'Angelo. Don't know what to say. You know, they end up getting Brook Lopez and the 27th pick. They said this was a long-term move to somewhat try to get Paul George. They got Lonzo Ball. I'm okay with this. And to me, this shows how much trust that they have in Lonzo Ball, who hasn't even played yet.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we talked a little bit about this before, and you look at Lonzo Ball. Lonzo Ball has shown, just in college and high school, at every level, he's shown that he's been one of them. You know, he could be a transcendent talent in the league. He has great vision. You know, one thing that the league likes is size. A 6'7" point guard, 6'6", 6'7" point guard. He can shoot the ball. That's another thing. He can score, but he prefers to be control the tempo of the game. And so that is very, very key. Find a guard who wants to control the tempo of the game, has the ability to score. Especially Chris Paul. You know, you look at Chris Paul. I mean, that's one of Chris Paul's greatest strengths is Chris Paul can score, but he'd rather control the tempo of the game and make sure everybody else can score. And he gets his in between through the game. That's how Lonzo Ball reminds me of in that aspect. Like I said, he has all the measurables. He has the size. Again, the vision on the court. He has the length to play great, to be a good defender, a great defender. So you look at that, and also just his ability to lead. I think that's key as well. He has shown the ability to lead. He showed it at UCLA. And that's one thing that the Lakers didn't have. Just somebody who was a leader. I mean, D'Angelo Russell was not a leader. I mean, when you're doing stuff like that in the locker room, you can't be considered a leader. You know, so, you know, they have a leader now, or it looks like they possibly have a leader. And you go from there and just hope that you build around that. Again, you said make a mention of Paul George. You look at Paul George being there next year, even possibly getting traded there this year. But Brook Lopez is a solid center. You know, he's been one of those players that been in the abyss. You know,
right, exactly.
and so you get him, and you try to make stuff work with Brook Lopez. See how he pans out. You know, like I say he's good around the rim. He's not a great rebounder, but he is an offensive player, so he can give you 20 points easily. You know, you look at Julius Randle, who's a good rebounder, energy guy. You know, Larry Nance, a good player. You know, like to see him healthy. And you go from there. You have something to build with. You have a young core. Put in Paul George next year, and you try to make some noise.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be big. Getting Paul George is going to be huge. In the chat room, we got David Wilkes. Appreciate you for jumping in. Also, we got Vince says, laugh out loud, don't mess with Swaggy. Yeah, do not mess with Swaggy P, or you will get traded, obviously. Rauf says, Lonzo not a snitch. LeVar whoop Lonzo if he starts snitching. That's probably what happened.
This is probably true.
Probably true. So, There was a comment by someone in the Indiana Pacers organization, the president, who says, Paul George wanting to leave is a gut punch. Couldn't have come at a worse time. Let's all be honest here. Nobody wants to stay in Indiana, okay? Be honest with yourself. Nobody wants to stay in Indiana. Nobody's focused on trying to stay. So I don't understand why you would want to do that in the first place. Why would you come out with that comment? I mean, Indiana is Indiana. Nobody's wanting to stay there. The last person that wanted to stay there was Reggie Miller. So let's all pump the brakes, the president.
Well, Danny Granger enjoyed Indiana. He liked Indiana.
Danny Granger, okay, yeah, that'll put 2 on the list.
You know, the problem, and I understand the GM. This is the problem with that, right? Paul George came out a couple weeks ago and said that he wanted Indiana to initially put players around him. He thought that they was extremely close in matching up with Cleveland and being able to beat Cleveland. And if you look at the playoff series, I mean, they played really well against Cleveland. I mean, I think that they probably played the best against Cleveland in the playoffs outside of the Warriors. So, you know, they didn't win one. I mean, of course, Boston won one. But I think that overall that Indiana has some nice, solid pieces that literally, if you could give Paul George another score, that Paul George might be able to really compete with Cleveland. You know, he upped his average in that series. I think he averaged like 27, 7 and 7 against LeBron on like almost 50% shooting or somewhere around there. So, I mean, he played well. You know, he just didn't have enough help. You know, you look at another year, Miles Turner developed more. Tees, you know, playing a little better. Things like that, you know. So you can see the optimism there. And then all of a sudden it comes out that he's like, I'm not retiring with you guys. So,
right.
You know, so that was painful. And then it also shot his trade value down. You know, that was the thing. Because now that everybody knows he's not coming back to Indiana, well, what can you trade him for?
Right, true.
You know, you have very, very few options to trade him for, because you have those teams that's like, okay, well, he might be a 1-year rental, like the Cavs were looking at, like, hey, we can probably get him on a 1-year rental and hopefully convince him to stay. But if you don't want to give up no serious piece. So like Kevin Love, which was the conversation for a long time, they were willing to give up Kevin Love. They didn't want to give up nothing else though. And Indiana's like, nah, we don't want Kevin Love. We already got issues with players who are not showing up.
Right, exactly.
So we don't want Kevin Love. So that kind of hurt his trade value. So now Indiana is stuck with the situation of, okay, we have this player that seemingly we know he's going to be leaving, and we want to get some value for him, but we're never going to be able to get the value that we want from him. I mean, let's be realistic. You know, Paul George is probably the fourth best small forward in the league. He's a top 20 player. He's the fourth best small forward in the league. And that's not a slide to him, because you look at the three that's in front of him, which is LeBron James, of course, Kevin Durant, and Kawhi Leonard. That's not a slide to him at all. I mean, it's a very, very competitive league, you know, but you're not going to get the value for him that you wanted because he announced that he was going to be leaving.
Right, exactly. And that does hurt, but at the end of the day, Indiana just really hasn't been the same in a long time. And it's not flashy. It's not a major city. And that's the problem. If you want to win a championship, your focus is not to go to Indiana. I'm sorry. So that's the mindset of a lot of players right now. So I kind of get both sides, but I think it did hurt. You made a great point. It did hurt Indiana's trade value of Paul George.
Yeah, it's definitely, his trade value definitely went down. And like I said, I can see him. He's going to get traded. I definitely see him getting traded. Now, what he gets traded for will be extremely interesting. Definitely. I think you can look at him getting traded. I don't think he's going to get traded right now at the beginning of the season. I think it'll be more toward the trade deadline. And I think that if he doesn't get traded